This podcast encourages and empowers you to create your own unique real story, develop your own unique real statement, and discover your own unique real self. The power is yours. Good morning, Paul Cheall. How are you doing on this wonderful, beautiful morning?
I'm good, thanks, Angel. It's not a very beautiful morning here. We're in England. It's a bit overcast and cool, and we're still in the middle of a typical British winter when you never know whether it's going to snow or rain or be sunny. But we've had everything so far.
Well, I definitely have that email in my draft inbox that I offer anyone that says the weather is anything like what you just described. So I can send to you some Caribbean sunshine at the press of a button.
That sounds good. I'll pick you up on that one later, Angel. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Paul, tell us, which of your talents is responsible for us connecting at this specific time in history?
Well, my name's Paul, and I'm a podcaster.
Hi, Paul.
It's a long story, really, Angel, but my late dad, Bill Cheall, fought in World War II, and he was at Dunkirk, North Africa, and D-Day. And in later years, he wrote his memoirs. And in 2011, I got his memoirs published by Pen and Sword. It was called Fighting Through from Dunkirk to Hamburg. And following up on that, in 2013, I started the Fighting Through podcast, and I'm still producing it today. It's first-hand unpublished accounts and interviews with veterans connected to Dad's war, and a lot more, really.
Wow. Now, again, let's say that slowly. So the name of the podcast, folks, is Fighting Through, right?
The podcast is Fighting Through, yeah.
Wonderful. Because it got caught up just a bit. It sounded like you were fighting through a podcast, right? Which is pretty cool as well. The play on words. So the Fighting Through the podcast. Now tell us, where did the connection, hey, I can do a podcast for this, come from after the book?
Well, it's kind of self-taught, really, but with a massive, and I say massive with a capital M, amount of input from a variety of podcasts about podcasting. I mean, some of the gurus I've listened to over the few years I've been doing it. There's like Colin Gray, Eric K. Johnson, Dave Jackson, Daniel J. Lewis. Too many to list, really, but they're all people I've avidly followed, and I think without their advice, I'd probably be nowhere.
And with those that came from the stories, how did they take it when you said, hey, I'd like to interview you for this particular scenario?
Well, mostly it's the veterans I've interviewed have all taken to it very willingly and enthusiastically, really. And I've interviewed several. One's been a rear gunner in a Lancaster plane. There's another one who's Wilf Shaw, who recently passed away, who was in many of the same battles as my dad. And one of the nice things about that was speaking to Wilf was a bit like speaking to my dad with the same questions and the same discussions I would have had had I been into the military history as much in years gone by as I am now. And they're all good. They having perhaps during their lives, typical veterans don't usually want to talk about their experiences, and that's the story you come across time and time again. But these guys, I think, are probably realizing that they're no longer mortal, and if there's a chance to talk about things, then they jump at it.
So this is done face to face, or do you do these over the internet, virtually, remotely?
Oh, it's always been face to face. I've always travelled to meet them because it's difficult, really, for an old age veteran to use the technology and get a decent quality, I guess.
Sure. Well, that's amazing. Well done, my friend. Wow. I love the artwork on the back end of your website, which tells the story, I think, of I have a similar similar type thing with the pictures of the people I've interviewed. Yours seems to be like this earthly look as well, which gives it that feeling. And I'm guessing that this has impacted your life tremendously.
This is the artwork you're referring to as the podcast artwork.
It's the wall. It's like the brown wall with the pictures in the back of what I guess are the veterans.
Yeah, that's a selection of my dad's photographs from his souvenir box.
Wow.
And my dad was a prolific photographer during the war, and I've got loads of photographs of his comrades and people he came into contact with, and that, for want of a better word, that frieze that forms the backdrop to my artwork, that was just a load of his photographs posted up, and I used some facility in, I think it was Photoshop or something, to change the style of it, and yes, I was quite pleased with that as well. But there's no sign of me getting bored with all of this yet. I've been lucky enough to be sent some absolutely amazing war memoirs from listeners. So on top of the interviews I've conducted, I've been lucky enough to be sent original unpublished memoirs from people who obviously died now. So it's been very good.
Yeah, that's amazing, Paul. Well, where's the best place for someone to go get this podcast?
Well, it would be any of the podcast listeners. You can get it through iTunes, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. But if you want a central place, any contact with me would be the Fighting Through podcast website, which is fightingthroughpodcast.co.uk. And that's got links to Facebook, Twitter, and the whole works. It's got the show notes and photographs that go with each episode as well.
Wonderful. All right, my friend. Well, tell me one other thing that you've done consistently over the last 3 years, please.
Well, I guess the main one has been to bring joy to my podcast listeners. I've had really good feedback from them.
How does it make you feel, seeing what started then to what is now?
Well, I guess in particular, when they hear their own relatives' war history read out on my show, it produces many emotions in them, particularly like pride, pleasure, and above all, tears. And I've been really humbled by the reactions I've had from them. I'll never forget the day one lady, Helen, wrote in to express her pleasure because she'd unexpectedly heard her grandfather's Dunkirk memoir being read out, and he was one of the crew of the so-called little ships of Dunkirk that rescued troops from the beaches. But she went on to say that, by the way, he'd also been in the World War I Battle of Gallipoli. And he's written a memoir about that. And would I like to use it on the show? Well, I jumped at the chance, and the rest is history, as they say, in more ways than one.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow. Why would you suggest to someone that's listening that they take a bit of a deeper look of their history?
Well, I think podcasting's extremely hard work, and it can take over your life if you let it, but it can also bring the utmost joy and fulfillment. And the journey I've been on, I could never have predicted the sorts of things I've discovered in my podcasting journey. And it really is just great fun and very rewarding. And I think in my time over the years, I've always been more of you might say, a scientist than an artist. But right now, I think I'm beginning to understand what it's like to be an artist, and it's a good feeling.
That's wonderful. Amazing audience. Again, you're hearing it live from Paul Cheall. You can definitely look him up, connect with him, get more of what he does at fightingthroughpodcast.co.uk. Paul, let's switch gears for a moment now. Let me invite you into my time machine that is surrounded with beautiful, warm, blue Caribbean water. Paul, what is your earliest childhood memory?
Well, I think it was when I was a youngster, just a toddler, I had a hot water bottle well, it was more like a cold water bottle, but it was a hot water bottle burst in my bed, and sheets and feet were soaked. And I think that's my earliest memory.
How old do you think you were?
I don't know, but probably as early as kids typically remember stuff. I don't know, 2, maybe 3.
Why do you think it's so clear, this memory?
Well, I think we all seem to rubber stamp memories onto our brains, which are at one extreme of the trauma pleasure spectrum. And of course, this was one at the wrong end, so it wasn't easy to forget.
So the water was cold, but it was in a bottle that would have usually had something that's hot.
Yeah, to keep my feet warm in bed as a youngster.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
That was in the days before central heating and stuff.
So, okay, all right, I get it. So it's basically a heating system where water runs through it, yeah? But it's just like a container, isn't it?
Angela, I'll forgive you the fact that you live in an enviably country, right? Hot, warm climate where you don't need such primitive things as hot water bottles to keep your feet warm in bed. But it's basically, a hot water bottle is a plastic, a rubberized bottle,
right,
usually flat with a stopper on it. And when you have extremes of cold weather, you can put hot water in it out of the tap, put the stopper back on, stick it in your bed, and it keeps your bed nice and warm for you.
Intriguing.
So that's. But over a period, they can burst if they're if you keep them too long. So that's it.
How do you see that memory connecting to who you are today?
I don't know, but as an adult, I've always had not a phobia of hot water bottles, but certainly whenever I use a hot water bottle, I always make sure that it's it hasn't got any leaks, and that's inbuilt in that childhood memory.
That's intriguing. Can I offer an interpretation to the thought picture you created in my mind with that memory?
Yeah.
I love the idea of what or when you said actually that I've always been a scientist, and now being an artist, if you would, is something more of what you do. I love the concept of the scientific side of what the water bottle is. However, it's really amazing to see the effects of what is in the bottle come out of the bottle, if you would.
Yeah.
That being your artistic skills, yeah, and who you are and the emotions that go with it. Sometimes it's a bit chilling, yeah, the experiences and the stories you hear or read or are shared with, but at the same time, it's helping you to grow and become even better as you help others as well.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure there's some truth in that, Angel. Yeah.
All right, my friend, if we fast forward to when you were 12 years old, what was your favorite song?
Right. I think it was The Legend of Xanadu by Dave Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch. And I can remember getting this toy whip out and cracking it along to the music. And it never rubbed off on me as an adult, though.
I love it. Well, my friend, we've arrived at our destination. But before we get off of this time machine, there's a small declaration form. Says yes or no. We're going to move pretty quickly here. Are you ready, Paul?
Right. Yeah.
Paul, have you chosen someone to pass on your skills to?
Not yet.
Are you married?
No, got a living with partner.
All right. Do you have children?
No.
Do you believe in God?
Agnostic, but I do believe prayer and religion does play a valid role in society. And I remember my dad saying in his memoirs that when he was on the beaches at Dunkirk in World War II, the lads often prayed to God, and he never saw a single atheist amongst them.
Wow. Do you have an inner circle of friends?
Yes.
Do you watch TV for more than 3 hours a day?
Not always, but often.
What about screen time, the phone and the computer? Is it more than 8 or less than 8 hours a day?
You're making me feel guilty now. Some days none, other days more than 3. It depends if I'm producing a podcast episode or not.
If you had to share with us your own unique real statement, Paul, a statement that represents who you are, what would you say that is?
I think it's making the most of your life while you can. And a final comment on that, in the famous wartime words of Winston Churchill, never give up.
Never give up. Paul, this has been such a great pleasure. Before you leave, is there anything else you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
Well, Angel, I'm conscious you live out, is it to Trinidad, Tobago?
Yes.
And just the minute I read that, it reminded me of a holiday I once had in St. Lucia, which is over in your neck of the woods. I've always been fascinated by accents, and I've got a rather nice story to share with you if we've got time.
Let's go for it.
I think when people come from different countries, there's always scope for confusion and misunderstanding over words. And I just love the Jamaican accent. And so I've always remembered this particular story. As I say, I was on holiday in St. Lucia once. Lovely part of the world, lovely friendly people. I was in a hotel complex, and there was a variety of open air like market stalls selling souvenirs and stuff. And I came up to one, and there was this big smiley local lady serving, and there was a T-shirt on display, and on the front of it said "Live Slow." And I wondered to myself, what's on the back of this? And I asked the lady what was on the back, and she said "Still Fast." Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, well, what does that mean? Do you mean windowsill, or what sort of sill? And she said, no, still fast, like the boat on the water. And we both got the joke, and we both laughed so much together. Mm-hmm. And I've still got that T-shirt as a memory from the other end of the pleasure spectrum, so to say.
Love it, my friend. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that with us, Paul.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Paul Cheall, thank you for being on what is inspired by 12-minute convos with Angel Jones.
Thank you, Angel. Great to speak to you. Goodbye.
Same here, my friend. Later.
Thank you.
This segment has been brought to you by Amazel Enterprise.